going to start off with a story about Chippy the parakeet. Chippy the parakeet never saw this coming. One second he was peacefully perched in his little cage, and the next he was sucked in and washed up and blown over. The problems began when Chippy's owner decided to clean Chippy's cage with a vacuum cleaner. She removed the attachment from the end of the hose and stuck it in the cage. That's when the phone rang. She turned to pick it up. She had barely said hello when Chippy got sucked in. The bird owner gasped, put down the phone, turned off the vacuum, and opened the bag. And sure enough, there was Chippy, still alive, but stunned. Since the bird was covered with dust and soot, she grabbed him and raced to the bathroom, turning on the faucet and holding Chippy under the running water. Then, realizing that Chippy was soaked and shivering, she did what any compassionate bird owner would do. She reached for the hairdryer and blasted her pet with hot air. Little Chippy never knew what hit him. A few days after the trauma, a reporter who had initially written about the event contacted Chippy's owner to see how the bird was recovering. Well, she said, Chippy doesn't sing anymore. He just sits and stares. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever gone through periods of your life that you felt like that bird? You just sit and you just stare. That life just kind of sucks you in and then washes you up and blows you over, and you really don't want to do anything, but again, just kind of just sit and stare. That's life. That's life. 1 minute everything is peaceful, 1 minute everything is calm, everything is going wonderful. There's no noise, there's no confusion, there's no drama, there's no crisis. But then the next moment you're hit with a sudden storm that you never saw coming on the horizon. Storms are like that. Sometimes the storms come into our lives when we least expect them. It's amazing how quickly life can go from calm the 1 minute to chaos in the very next moment. All of a sudden, lightning strikes your house and every electrical circuit fried in a moment, in a second. It just happens. And every appliance plugged into every electrical outlet is fried, including your television, your computer. Everything is gone. Or there's a message on your voicemail from your boss at work who says, hey, I forgot to tell you that the report that we thought was due next week, I have to have it tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Panic sets in. You come home from work and your wife says, hey, honey, we have a letter from the IRS. Or your teenage son or daughter calls with these encouraging words. Hey, Dad, does our insurance cover the other guy's car? Calm to chaos in a moment. There's no warning, there's no announcement, there's no great preparation in time. 1 moment it is smooth sailing, and the next moment life just all of a sudden just caves in on you. If you've ever been there, and I'm pretty sure I could go around the room and everybody would say, yeah, I've been there. We've all been there. But there's a day in the life of Jesus Christ that you need to know about. It was a day of devastation. It was a day in which Jesus received devastating news, a threat against his own life, swarming demands, interruption to his plans, friends who doubted him, and yet somehow through the course of this day, Jesus remained calm. He didn't blow up and get angry. He didn't bail out and quit, although the temptation to do either probably would have been great. Take your Bible and turn to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. I want to look at this day. If you've ever ridden the roller coaster, if you've ever been on the roller coaster and ridden from sorrow to celebration and back again, all in the same day, and ever wondered, does God really know how I feel? This roller coaster of emotions? Well, yes, this day is going to help you answer that question, because before this day is over, Jesus is going to run the gamut of emotion. His world is turned upside down. In Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus. "This is John the Baptist," he told his servants. "He has been raised from the dead, and that's why miraculous powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, chained him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, since John had been telling him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to kill John, he feared the crowd, since they regarded John as a prophet. When Herod's birthday celebration came, Herodias, his daughter, danced before them and pleased Herod. So he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she answered, "Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter." Although the king regretted it, he commanded that it be granted because of his oaths and his guests. So he sent orders and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. Then his disciples came, removed the corpse, buried it, and went and reported to Jesus. When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by a boat to a remote place to be alone. Jesus, on this day, learns of John's death. What news to start your day? John was dead. And who was John? Well, John happened to be the forerunner of the coming of Jesus. He was the cousin of Jesus. He also happened to be his friend. The one person who probably understood Jesus better than anybody is now dead. The one person of whom Jesus said, "Of man born of woman, none are greater than John the Baptizer." And now here comes the message that John is no more. Can you imagine the intense sorrow of that news? It's easy for us to look at that and say, well, we've all known people to pass away. Well, John didn't just pass away. John was killed by the wicked Herod. So imagine getting the news, if you can, that your closest friend has been killed. Brutally killed. And you can begin to feel what Jesus is feeling, the hurt and the pain, the anger and the sorrow. No wonder he wanted to get out of there. He wanted to get out of there. No wonder he wanted to just get in the boat and go out into the middle of the sea and be alone. So would you. I think, again, we've all been there, where we just want to get away and be alone. But that's not all. I'm going to flip back and forth between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because each one of them gives us different scenes of the same day. So go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 9. We're going to look at Luke's account here. In Luke chapter 9, there's something else that they tell Jesus. In Luke chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. Herod the Tetrarch heard about everything that was going on. He was perplexed, because some said that John had been raised from the dead, some that Elijah had appeared, and others that one of the ancient prophets had risen. "I beheaded John," Herod said, "but who is this I hear such things about?" And he wanted to see him. Herod is looking for Jesus. The very one who had John killed is now looking for Jesus. And so there's a great possibility that the disciples brought unto Jesus more than just news of sorrow. There's a great possibility that they brought to Jesus the news of also warning. There's some people who think that Herod is trying to see Jesus because he wanted to do to Jesus what he had done to John. I don't know about that, and we can't prove that. But I do understand, as I said, that same King Herod who chopped off the head of John the Baptizer is now looking for Jesus. That much I do know. Veiled threat? Perhaps. Reason to be concerned? Absolutely. And so Matthew chapter 14 and verse 13 says, when Jesus heard it, he withdrew from there. A combination of sorrow over John and caution over the threat of Herod. He needed to get away. But before he could, something occurs. This time, Mark fills in the blank. Turn to the book of Mark, chapter 6. Notice what Mark says on this occasion. Mark chapter 6 and in verse 30. Mark chapter 6, verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. So now Jesus also learns, all that the disciples had done. There's more news. And so they come to Jesus and they tell him about John. That's devastating news. They come to Jesus and they report the threat of Herod. He's looking for you. But at the same time, they come to Jesus with the news of their own victories, as they have been preaching and teaching, and they're coming back with stories of enthusiasm because of their success. And back up in Mark chapter 6 and verse 7, let's put the pieces together. Mark chapter 6 and verse 7. He summoned the 12 and began to send them out in pairs and gave them authority over unclean spirits. Drop down to verse 12 and 13. Verse 12. So they went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons, anointed many sick people with oil, and healed them. Now you get down to verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Can you imagine their mood? Think about them. They hate to tell Jesus about John. They hate to tell Jesus about Herod. But at the same time, they are so enthused because think about what they had been doing. And their mood is one of immeasurable joy and celebration of success of their work. And they all gather with Jesus. And I can only imagine the scene as they're all trying to talk at once. They're so excited. They're wanting to tell Jesus about what they did. And maybe Peter is standing there and maybe he tells Jesus of some lame man that he healed. Maybe John speaks up and says, Lord, the people gathered and they listened to our preaching. Maybe Matthew talks about how the demons were subject to your word. James says, Jesus, you should have seen the crowds. It was amazing. And they're all talking at once. They had never done anything like that before. These were ordinary men, and he had sent them out to preach and to motivate people to repent, and they're working miracles. These are fishermen. There's a tax collector. They're common men. Again, what an emotional moment as they want to share with the master all the things that they have just done. Imagine the heart of Jesus at this moment. On the one hand, weeping and breaking over the loss of John, at the same time rejoicing over the success of the 12. You know, Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. It's kind of hard to do all that at the same time, isn't it? But that was the day that he was having. Go back to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14 and in verse 13. When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns. Now you have a multitude that comes to Jesus. You know, the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John talks about the multitudes a lot. You know, never really sure how many that involved, but on this occasion we can come pretty close. Because Matthew chapter 14 verse 21 says that there were about 5,000 men aside from women and children. You think we might hazard a guess that if there were about 5,000 men, and then you count the women and you count the children, you might want to hazard a guess that maybe there's 15 to 20,000 people there? That's a multitude. It's a lot of people. That's like a NBA arena, 20,000 people. You see, he has sent them out to preach and to heal, and they've done that. And they've been telling people about the Jesus of Nazareth, and they've been telling people that he is the Messiah. And the people, no doubt, want to meet this man that they're hearing about. We want to see this Jesus. You're healing in the name of this man, so where is he? And the 12 say, come with us. We'll show you. And they come to Jesus with a crowd. Mark adds a little bit more to this. Back in Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6 and verse 31. At the end of verse 31, notice what it says. He said to them, come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while. For many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They did not have time to even eat. That was the kind of day that Jesus is having. Have you ever had so many people put so many demands upon your time that you didn't even have time to do anything for yourself? You didn't even have time to stop and eat? You know, I think every mother understands at least what that is about. Everybody wants a piece of mom all at the same time. You know, here's a mom and she's trying to help little Susie with her fractions, helping her to do her homework. And on the other side of the table, she's trying to help little Johnny with his nouns and his pronouns. At the same time, she hears an awful sound and she finds that Junior is trying to dunk the cat in the bathtub upstairs. And so she runs up there, and about that moment the doorbell rings. And then she smells the biscuits and they're burning because she forgot that they were in the oven. And the fire alarm is now going off and the phone rings. And the husband says, hey, your phone's ringing. Are you going to answer that? As a mother, you're pulled in so many different directions. 20,000 people, give or take. Mark, who is the master of details in his writing, paints a picture. And Mark says, we did not even have time to eat. Think about what he's faced. He gets news of John. He gets the veiled threat from Herod. He rejoices with the celebration of the 12. He's nearly suffocated as maybe around 20,000 people all want a piece of him. They want to be around him. They want to hear him. They want to talk to him. They want to touch him. They want to tell him stories. They want a miracle. Whatever the case may be. They're crowding around this one man. And so here's Jesus facing bereavement, jeopardy, happiness, and huge crowds all in the same day, and it's still not over. Again, in Mark chapter 6, verse 31 and 32, he said to them, come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while, for many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they went away in the boat by themselves to a remote place. Jesus had to get away. He had to get away. He needed some time alone. He needed some peace. And so in my mind, I see Jesus as humbly as he can, making his way through the crowd, and he gets with his men, and they get into a boat, and they launched, and they row out into the Sea of Galilee, leaving the people standing behind there on the beach, all waving at him and calling to him. But he had to leave the people. He needed some time alone. And finally, as they row out far enough into the Sea of Galilee, finally, there's no crowds. There's no demands from all of those people. It's hard to see Jesus that way sometimes. It's hard to understand that he made a special effort to get away from the people. But he needed some time. But Luke tells us that those people on a beach had an idea. So if you turn to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, verses 10 and 11. Luke chapter 9, beginning in verse 10, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus all that they had done. He took them along and withdrew privately to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds found out, they followed him. The multitudes followed him. Jesus is on a boat to Bethsaida. It was about a 6 mile hike around to Bethsaida on foot. And Jesus watches the people disappear as he and his men head towards this place where they're going to rest. But by the time Jesus and his men row over there and they get to where they're going to rest, by that time, the multitude of people have hiked the 6 miles around, and the same people that Jesus waved goodbye to as they are getting closer to the shore, now they're waving hello. Surprise. We're all here. What Jesus has in mind for his day and what the people have in mind are not the same. What Jesus wants so desperately and what he receives are not the same thing. And I bet again that some of you know how that feels. You desperately need a good night's rest, but maybe you have a child that's up sick all night long. You need to catch up on some work and things happen and you just get further and further behind. Finally, you got a Saturday where you can just kind of catch your breath, but then maybe your neighbor comes over and knocks on your door and says, hey, would you mind helping me? I've got a plumbing issue over here. And you smile and you go. And I'm here to tell you this morning that Jesus knows exactly how you feel. His pulse raced at times. His eyes grew weary. His heart grew heavy. He knew what it was like to get out of bed in the early morning before the sun ever even thought about coming up. And I bet he knew what it was like for people to keep him up way into the night. I'm not sure that we understand that. I'm not sure that we fully grasp that about him. I think we understand that Jesus endured the heavy-duty tragedies of life. He's the Jesus of Isaiah 53. That's our picture of Jesus. He is the man of sorrows. He is acquainted with our grief. That's our Jesus. But the question is, can God relate to the everyday hassles and the everyday burdens and troubles of my life? And the answer is yes, he can. Yes, he can. And maybe that's the reason that there's so much emphasis in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John upon what happened on this particular day. I've often wondered if they didn't all write about this day. They all didn't write about his birth. Not all the gospel writers wrote about his birth. They all didn't write about his temptation. They all didn't write about his baptism. But every single writer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all wrote about this particular day. As if God knew that one day you and I would wonder, does Jesus really understand what I'm going through? And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all say, you better believe he does. They all remembered this day. There was a little boy who was outside shooting baskets. And he would take the basketball and he would shoot at the goal and it would always fall short. He just didn't have enough energy to get it up there. He just wasn't big enough. He wasn't strong enough to make that ball reach that 10-foot rim. And he would try and he would try and he would fall short every single time. And about that time, the dad comes home from work and his dad comes over and he sees his son struggling. And so the dad takes the ball from the son and he says, son, this is how you do it. And he throws it up and it goes right in. And he hands the ball to the little boy and the boy tries again and it falls short. And the dad takes the ball in frustration and he says, son, this is not hard. It's very easy. And he shoots it again and the ball goes right in. And he hands the ball to the little boy and the little boy looks up at his dad and he says, Dad, it's easy for you up there. You don't know how hard it is for me down here. And I want to tell you something. You can never, ever, ever say that about God. You can't say that about God. Of the many things that Jesus taught us, he is teaching us that he does know how we feel. In John chapter 1 and verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He has walked down your path. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. He can sympathize with us. We have to see him that way. You know, here's a politician, and he throws on a hard hat with the television cameras in tow, and he walks into a factory, and he walks around like he's just one of the guys. I'm just one of the fellas. Here's a social worker, and she goes into the inner city, and she makes a big deal about, you know what, I slept on the ground just like a homeless person. Here's a 4-star general, and he marches right into the mess hall, and he sits down and eats lunch with the privates. What are they trying to communicate when they do this? What are they saying if not, I understand, I relate, I know what you're going through? But you and I know, and the workers know, that when the television cameras are off and the cameras are gone, the politicians are going to be gone too. And the homeless person knows that tomorrow night the social worker will be right back in the suburbs in her comfortable bed in her home. And the privates know that for every meal a general eats with them, he'll eat dozens and dozens and dozens in the officers' club. Jesus did not come for a photo op to say, look at what I'm doing. He didn't walk upon this earth giving out sound bites for the evening news. He came and he pitched his tent and he stayed. All of which means from the funeral home to the factory to the frustrations of your everyday schedule, he understands. By the way, the disciples seemed more stressed about this day than Jesus ever was. When you go back to Matthew chapter 14, Matthew chapter 14 and verse 14. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd, had compassion on them, and healed their sick. Jesus welcomed them. He welcomed them and he healed their sick. Verse 15. When evening came, the disciples approached him and said, this place is deserted and it is already late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves. They said, Lord, you have accommodated these people. You've gone well beyond in taking care of them, and you've taught them and you've healed them. Lord, if you don't send them away now, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to feed all these people. Well, verse 16. They don't need to go away, Jesus told them. You give them something to eat. What a test. What a test. You see what he's doing? He wants to learn if they have learned anything. He wants to know the depth of their faith. And wouldn't you like to say that they learned their lesson? Wouldn't you like to say by now that they have faith that Jesus can do anything? But they looked into the eyes of him who is the bread of life, and they said, we don't have enough bread. We can't feed all these people. His friends doubted him. The only time Jesus asked for anything that day, they looked at him and they said, you have got to be kidding me. A day in the life of Jesus. Intense sorrow over the death of John, the veiled threat that Herod's looking for you, the joy and celebration of the homecoming of the 12 and all that they had accomplished, the crowds that were immense following him everywhere. He didn't get the rest that he needed, didn't even have time to eat, and now his closest friends are doubting him. The people who should have known better looked at him and said, Lord, there's just no way. It's not possible. Calm to chaos. It It's interesting to me in all of this that not one time did Jesus stomp his feet and demand to get his own way. Not one time did he get angry at the disciples and say to them, let's find another beach where there's just not any of these people. Not one time do I read that he rebuked the crowd and said to these people, what are you thinking? Why didn't you bring food for yourselves if you were going to be out here all day? Throughout the whole thing, he remained calm, and he told his men to have the people to sit down. And he took some fish and some bread, and he fed thousands of people miraculously. But before he did, in the midst of such a chaotic day, he bowed his head and he thanked the Father for the food. Just one day in the life of Jesus. I came across this story, and it's a pretty powerful story. But it's about a little boy who went into a pet store, and he wanted to buy a puppy. And so the store owner showed him a litter in a box, and the boy looked at the puppies as he picked each one of them up, and he looked them over, and he put them back in the box. And he walked over to the owner, and he said, I've picked out a puppy. How much is it going to cost? And the owner told him. And he said, well, I need to go make the money. And the owner says, well, don't take too long because puppies like this sell very, very quickly. So the boy turned and smiled and said, I'm not worried. I think my puppy will still be here. And so the story goes on that the boy, he went to work. He was helping clean up yards, washing windows, mowing the grass. He worked hard and he saved his money. And when he had enough for the puppy, he came back to the store. He walked up to the counter and he laid down a pocket full of wadded up bills, and the store owner sorted through them and verified that everything was there. And he said, all right, son, go ahead and pick out your puppy. So the boy reached in the back of the box and he pulled out a skinny dog with a limp leg and then started to leave. And the owner stopped him and said, I don't think you want that puppy. Don't take that puppy. That's the crippled one. He can't play with you. He can't have fun with you. He'll never be able to run with you. He can't play fetch. Put that one back and pick one of the healthier puppies. And the boy said, no, thank you, sir. This is the dog that I've been looking for. And as the boy turned to leave, the store owner started to speak, and then he remained silent. Because now he understood why that little boy picked out that puppy. Because extending from the bottom of his pants, he could see a brace. This little boy was crippled. I wonder why that little boy wanted that puppy. And I bet you it's because he knew how it felt. You see, ladies and gentlemen, that's why Jesus is the best friend that you are ever going to have. He is the best friend that you are ever going to have because he knows how you feel. He knows how all of us feel. He loves you with a compassion just like that little boy. And like that little boy, he paid a great price to take you home with him. Does God know how I feel? Does God understand? Yes, he does. And that should give you hope. That should give you hope the next time you pray and you say, Lord, help me. Help me. If you are here this morning and you have not yet rendered obedience to the gospel of Christ, you are missing out on the greatest thing that this life has to offer. This temporary life that we go through. Don't you want to become a part of God's family? Don't you want to become a child of God and live this life through difficult times? Yes. Jesus himself went through some very, very difficult times. So who are we to say that we're not going to go through difficult times? Jesus went through it. He didn't have to. He didn't have to. He could have stayed up in heaven. But he came to this earth, lived among us, suffered temptation, suffered tragedies, suffered exhaustion, suffered everybody wanting everything from him. Why? because of each and every one of you. That's why. If you have a need, we ask that you make it known as together we stand and sing the invitation song.